Welcome back to the Breaking Patterns series. In our first video, we did an overview of the three different types of patterns that I believe impact our well-being and how we show up in the world. So the first one that I outlined was our family of origin patterns. So basically what we learned growing up, what was modeled to us, becomes our normal. And we have a high likelihood of repeating that in our own lives. Secondly was our view of self, and that is usually determined by adolescent age 12 or 13, and we cement this view of self and then start to internalize the world that we see based on that view of self. So in other words, we filter information kind of like a lens on glasses, and it's filtered through that view of self. And then thirdly is how we interact with the people in our lives, so our partners, our friends, etc. Well, today I want to focus on our family of origin. So that is the family that we all grew up in. And there's a few things I just want to highlight today. The first one is family roles. And so these are the things that shape our experience growing up. All of us tend to take on a family role. It's not something that is explicitly given to us. Obviously, it's not something that we necessarily choose to take on, but instead it's something that we adopt as a way to survive in our family environments. Now that may sound extreme or harsh, and that can be done subtly, where we grow up in a very healthy family environment. For example, where success is very important, and so we take on the role of kind of being the good one or the striver, or it could be a response to something traumatic in the home where we have to shut down our emotions because it's so chaotic in the home. But I just want to give you some examples of what are some of the roles that we take on within our families. And the reason again why this is important is because it shows up later in life, as adults in our own romantic relationships, and we need to be able to recognize what are these patterns that we are bringing into our relationships, so then we know what to do with them, if we need to change them, or if we need to adapt somehow. So here I just want to list out some of the typical ones. Would be the caregiver or the hero. They're the person that's responsible one, the dependable one, often like the perfect child. They try to make the family look good from the outside. They take on adult responsibilities early, and they often feel pressured to succeed. That's like academically and also financially. Then there's the child that's the scapegoat. They're blamed for all the family problems. Maybe they're an eldest child who gets blamed for the youngest children's behavior, and they become the easy one to blame. They often act out and are rebellious. They often express the tension others avoid within the family, and they can become kind of like the identified problem. Oftentimes when we see parents want their children to come to therapy, it's really because they're being identified as the scapegoat when the problem really exists within the family system. Then there's the lost child. They're the quiet, the independent, the emotionally withdrawn one. They avoid conflict and attention. They often feel invisible or overlooked. They become very self-sufficient. I often, as a therapist, I'm more concerned about people that take on a lost child. They're the ones that, are the ones that are kind of like not boisterous. And what we do know is when we internalize our emotions, that becomes problematic later in life. In fact, we know that if you hold emotional trauma internally, it is one of the significant variables and causes of long-term chronic disease. Another one could be like the mascot or the clown. They use humor to diffuse tension, lightens the mood during conflict. They may avoid serious emotions by using humor, and they often struggle to be taken seriously. There's the enabler. They protect or make excuses for other family members' behavior. For example, in cases of addiction, they often minimize the problem and they help maintain the status quo rather than challenging it. Then I'll give you a few more. There's the golden child. They are the ones that are idealized by the parents. They are held to high expectations, and they often feel pressure to maintain perfection and to not let their parents down. I think oftentimes these people are not allowed to be themselves. They're there to fulfill a role within the family. Then there's the black sheep. They're seen as different or outside the family norm. They often challenge family beliefs or values, and they may be unfairly judged or excluded. And lastly, the peacemaker, the one that mediates conflicts. They avoid confrontation. They often get in the middle, try to bring the tension down within the family. So, like I said before, that these are adaptive responses, especially in environments that are stressful or dysfunctional. And, we don't always just take on one role. Sometimes we take on multiple roles depending on the context. And so those roles can shift over time. So they're patterns, they're not fixed identities, in other words. But again, I think it is very important to understand what has occurred within our family system so that we can see where our patterns in our current relationships come from and whether we're repeating them or not. So one of the other areas in family systems that really impacts the patterns in our life is within the family context. There are two different types of rules that we are to follow. So the first one is called explicit rules. So explicit rules are the ones that are spoken by the parents and they're very direct. So let me give you some examples. You need to be home by 10 p.m. on school nights. That's your curfew. There's no cell phones at the dinner table. You must finish your homework before watching TV. Everyone helps clean up after dinner. You must tell us where you're going and who you're with. We attend church on Sundays. No yelling or swearing in the home. These rules are often spoken. Sometimes some families even write them down, but they are clearly expressed so that everybody knows the expectations. So implicit rules, on the other hand, they are ones that are not spoken, they're indirect, but everyone is expected to follow. So I'll give you some examples of that. Don't disagree with dad. We don't talk about personal problems outside the family. Keep your feelings to yourself. Don't outshine your siblings. Mom's mood determines the atmosphere of the house. Avoid conflict at all costs. We don't talk about money. And success equals worth. So implicit rules are learned through patterns of behavior, reactions, body language, and consequences, not direct statements like explicit rules are. So the implicit rules, in my opinion, is what actually governs behavior within a family. And that is where we learn how to operate. And we learn to behave based on the implicit rules. And those are the ones that we have a high likelihood of repeating in our adult life, especially during stressful times. And one of the most stressful times or life-changing times is actually during when a child is born. And so that's when we resort back to typically those implicit rules that we learned. So I want you to pause, to ask yourself, to reflect on what were the roles that I grew up with? How did they influence how I'm behaving today? What are both the explicit and the implicit rules that I grew up with? Because the explicit rules also define our values, as do the implicit rules. And what are the ones that have affected me the most? Which are the ones that became adaptive, that allowed me to survive? And are they still useful to me today? Or are they now what we call maladaptive? So they're not really working in the way that they once intended us to. And is it helping me get closer in my relationships today, whether that be to my partner or whether that to be my kids or to the people that matter the most in our life? So let's all be aware of those patterns that we learned in our upbringing and be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves, how are they serving me today? I hope that gives you some information for you to reflect on in an honest way. Stay tuned for the next breaking pattern video, where we are going to focus on our view of self. and how that impacts how we show up today. Take care.